You're very welcome along to another CESI Staffroom. The CESI Staffroom is a podcast for teachers, about teachers, directed towards teachers. We're delighted to have Michael Hallissy in the CESI Staffroom today. Now, before I go across to Michael, let me tell you a bit about the podcasts, the CESI Staffroom, from now moving forward. So, CESI is 50 years old, and I joked about this in a recent post on the CESI list. If you're not on the CESI list, then I'd suggest you get onto it, cesi.ie. It's a community of teachers. They talk ed tech, they talk education, and the threads go on and on. So if you're a teacher, if you're in education, then you want to be on the CESI list. So I mentioned in the CESI list that CESI is 50, so it begs the question, which came first? Computers in education or the Society for Computers in Education? And CESI is 50, and when myself and John spoke about this, John is Magic Superfly producer John Heffernan, who's always hiding in the background with a big stick. When I suggested to him we want to do something about CESI is 50, we said, how about we get all the people from the start of CESI? So let's find out, and let's use that overused Steve Jobs line, and I use it myself quite a bit. Let's look back to join the dots moving forward, because CESI is still moving forward. And without even thinking, he said, Michael Hallissy, he's the man. He's the first one to open this up. So, Michael, you're very welcome to the CESI Staff Room.
Thank you, Hassan. It's a pleasure.
Michael, former primary school teacher, your introduction to CESI, what was it?
Yeah, well, I'm not. I'm a bit amused that you're thinking of me as one of the early people in CESI, because I probably came into it, probably 10 or 15 years after it was started. I think my first introduction to it was to the great Dr. Elizabeth Oldham in Trinity College, Dublin, and I trained as a primary teacher in Coláiste Mhuire, Marino, on Griffith Avenue, and we had a wonderful president at the time, Brother Plunkett Nolan, God be good to him. And we had an Apple Mac in the art room. And that was my introduction to computers. And Plunkett and myself and a couple of others used to play with it. We used to work with logo and basic programming and different things. And then when I graduated from Marino after 3 years, in those days, you did a fourth year in Trinity. It was called your honours degree. And I luckily did my project with Elizabeth on managing the microcomputer in the primary school.
And what does a lesson plan look like? How do you introduce? Like, that's
Well,
the thing.
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, actually, at that time, I was teaching these children, and I was using some people listening today might remember it. It was an app. It was a piece of software called Mr. Pod, and I was teaching them the alphabet. Okay, well, I was trying to reinforce it or whatever I was trying to do, and I was using it to motivate them. And this guy used to bounce up and down on the screen, and I didn't know how to use. I didn't have keyboarding skills, so at night I went to Ballymun, to the comprehensive school in Ballymun, to learn how to type, so that I would know where the keys were, so that I'd be quick. So a lesson plan probably didn't even mention technology, even though I was very lucky. I was always very lucky with the inspectors, the schools inspectors that I had in those early years. One man, Michael Leonard, who did my dip, was really into computers, so I was very lucky. And they were always, they always were supportive. I had Jimmy Kavanagh afterwards as well, and they were always very supportive of, I suppose what you'd call now innovative practice. But I was always trying things out, and I was always trying to figure out how I could use this to help the kids to learn. That's why I was doing it. It was that was my focus, because I'm not very techy, actually.
And I suppose when did it turn to innovative practice? When did the teaching and learning stop and then become, well, if we use this, it's going to be innovative? And I'm using air quotes, of
Yeah.
course.
I think in fairness that happened around 94 for me. I was in the school. I started teaching in Lucan in Sculvera, Woodview, Early Heights in 1986, and I left them in 1989 to go off and do a master's in Boston College. And I went for 1 year and ended up staying for 5. And I came back and I had just seen the World Wide Web, the internet, It was just starting out at the time. That's for me when innovation started in my teaching. I had a wonderful principal, Henry Tyne, great colleagues on staff. My business partner actually was in that school, John Hurley. And we started really playing around with the internet. And actually, that reconnected me back in with CESI. And it started off a whole chapter of things from 94 up to 97 or 98 when I went into the department.
Because there's common thought out there that innovation in education sort of ran in parallels with the internet. When the internet
Mm,
came in, all of a sudden it was that bit more accessible to do things, as opposed to when the computer came to the classroom. When the computer came to the classroom, it was a teaching aid. When the internet came
mm,
to the classroom on the computer, and all of a sudden, innovative, and again, I'm using the
yeah.
kind of innovative learning started.
Yeah, I go some of the way with that. I mean, I think we had wonderful, that software that I talked about there on the BBC Micro. It was very simple, but it worked. It did a job for me. Uh, I think, okay, the internet is this wonderful, wild library catalog of stuff. In the early days, it was quite limited, actually. Um, I think the most important factor in all of this, and has remained to this very day, is the teacher. And the teacher being confident and competent to not to be afraid to use the digital technologies. And it's gone way beyond computers now. In those days it was just a computer, but now we have all sorts of devices that we can use. And that's the key for me. And it's the teacher who makes the decision in the moment. Oh, we could do this. And I think that is actually where the internet comes in, because it allows those spur of the moment decisions, and it allows you and yours and the learners to go off and maybe do something and give them access to a particular resource or an app or whatever, if it is going to help them in their learning. So I think that's, to me, is where the innovation piece comes in.
And I mean, I have so many questions about the innovation in education, and your so your background and what's brought you here today. Do you come across to me as being very teacher centric? So the learning,
Yes.
which is something I'm passionate about, it has to come from the teacher. All this
Yeah,
technology around us, if the teacher doesn't want to teach, it doesn't matter what you have in your classroom.
exactly. Exactly.
Um, and how has CESI supported this? Because CESI is very, I mean, Computers in Education Society of Ireland, that's the title, but it's teachers. Um, it's it's again, it's teacher centric. It's support for teachers.
Yeah. Well, to me, and I was thinking again about this when we were, preparing for it. I mean, this to me, CESI is all about people, and in the early days, um, there was some wonderful people involved in CESI. These people were pioneers. I'm going to name a few names, but I'm going to
Oh,
leave
please
people
do.
out. But the likes of Tomás O'Brien and Paddy Bates and Eddie Gilmartin and Robbie O'Leary and all of these teachers. There was many, many of them, and CESI was an interesting mix because it brought together teachers from primary, post primary, higher education, and actually from further education and training, the VC sector at the time. So it's always had this eclectic mix. And again, I was thinking that in those days, the computers, as I said, were quite big, and we used to have to put them in the back of our cars, and we would, with no incentive other than meeting
Mm.
people, drive to Blackrock Education Centre, where Tomas would have organised a room, or we would have went. I remember going to De La Salle and Ballyfermot. We'd arrive at 8 o'clock. We'd all bring there could be 20 teachers in that room,
Mhm.
and they all brought their own computer. So they had to lug it out of the car, up the stairs, set it up. There was a cup of tea, and there was chat. And people were hovering around, and they were looking to see what people were doing with logo, and they were looking to see what people were doing on the internet. I remember teaching Paddy Bates how to use HTML, right?
Wow.
And Paddy created the CESI website using the HTML that we thought at the time. So it has always been about people, and it has always been about sharing of practice, which I think more and more is needed today than ever.
Do you think that's where the pandemic, uh, that pandemic actually helped in that sense, in that we all stopped, dropped, and we had to reach out? What are you doing in your school? I love that idea of well, what are
Yeah.
you doing?
Yeah. But I think that's the key question. I agree with you, first of all. I think connections, it's all about connections. I mean, I do a lot of work now in the whole area of online and
Mm,
blended learning. But anyway, and people say to me, what's the best app and what's the best this and what's the best that? Actually, what we focus on mostly is on discussions and how you can create good discussion, whether it's online or whether you're back in the classroom. So I think those connections and sharing and that question, what are you doing? How are you doing it? These are the key questions teachers want answered. And also, particularly, I was primary, but particularly at post primary, if you're a subject teacher, you love your subject. And you really want to know, if you're a maths teacher, how can I use digital technology to support me in my teaching and also to help ultimately me, my students learn? So it's a very, having conversations with like-minded people, and that's what CESI brought together. It brought together a group of people. We were probably very different at the time, because you have to remember, in the 1980s and the 1990s, computers in our schools were in a separate space. They were not actually in the classrooms. You went to the computer room like the pencil room. So we were a particular tribe. We were probably, people were afraid of us, or and if you had one of us in your school, it was seen as, oh, that's great.
yeah.
But things have changed dramatically since then.
Have they though?
Uh, I
That's
think
a
they
bit
do.
of
I
a
think they,
bombshell, and will just, have
yeah.
they really changed that much?
Well, what I mean is that there is now an expectation, at least, that digital is part of everybody's responsibility.
Okay.
Okay. And we live in a digital society. Okay. There's a lot happening in the area of digital competencies about from a citizen's point of view. So we have a duty of care to teach our children at all levels how to be safe, how to use these tools, and how to use them creatively and productively.
Hmm.
I think so. I do think it has changed. And we're great in Ireland at criticizing ourselves, but I actually think, because I do a lot of work at the European level in the policy area, a lot of what we have done since 1997 uh, in the policy area has been very good, and it has taken time, but there is a lot of joined up thinking in our own department and among our support services in this area. So I do think fundamentally there we have changed. It's no longer, Michael Hallissy or John Hurley are the computer experts in their school. Of course, there's a long way to go. Teachers, we have to constantly help them to become more confident and competent. But I think we're well on the road.
Um, Sorry for that was completely off center.
That's all right.
Um, I it's something I feel very strongly about.
Yeah.
So this, if we bring it back to CESI, what do you think? And I think you've answered this a little bit. What do you think the greatest impact of CESI was?
Well, I mean, I think it's had a. I think in the early days, in particular, when I was very active in it, the whole area of digital education was niche, and it brought a focus. It put a spotlight on this thing called computers in education, and it was very instrumental uh, in it, and particularly in the background, I suppose. Uh, there's a lot of focus now at a European level on whole government consultation and stakeholder involvement, etc.
Yeah.
CESI were there from the very beginning. Again, I've mentioned Elizabeth Oldham. I mean, some of the earliest documents about computers in education were developed by Elizabeth. She wrote them, and they were CESI. Uh, they were position papers, if you like, from the Computer Education Society of Ireland. So that was being taken on board inside in the department. The first digital strategy for schools that was developed in the department had two active CESI members involved in that project. One was a great friend of mine, Cyril Drury, who at the time was a teacher in Wesley College, and myself. Cyril was there on the post-primary side, and I was there on the primary side. Uh, Cyril, I hope he doesn't mind. He's a little older than me. I was the novice, and he guided me through the process. So the fingerprints of the very first digital strategy for schools in 1997, which at a time was a really exciting time in Irish education for digital, because this now put a strategy in place for digital education, which we didn't have before. Now, I must add very quickly that there was a lot happening for probably 10 years before that, maybe even more. There were people in the department, there was a group of inspectors that were hugely innovative, and they had blazed a trail. But now in 97, we finally had a strategy. So I think CESI has always been a key source of influence for the department in terms of what is the thinking of this uh, group.
I think everything you mentioned is absolutely right. I love Elizabeth to bits. And the first time I met her, I was very intimidated because I know her for a long time. Like I'm following what she's doing, and
Hmm.
I distinctly remember sitting down in a coffee shop with her one morning after CESI meet or some gathering of of nerds, of like-minded
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
sitting down, and I said, "Well, Elizabeth, what do you how like how do you describe CESI? Like what's the future of CESI, or how do you describe it?" And she said, quite without even thinking, she said, "Sometimes I believe we're fighting above our weight belt or
yes,
weight limit."
yes,
I
agreed.
I I think we're fighting alongside. I think CESI as an organization is fighting alongside. I don't believe we're fighting above our weight limit at all.
Hmm.
No. I believe
Yeah,
because of the people, because of the makeup, because of the teachers, CESI
yeah,
is a force to be reckoned with. I believe.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think you have to put it in perspective. I mean, it's a voluntary organization. People are giving of their time freely, and um, and a lot of people have been so generous with their time and with their views over the years, and I see it as a learning organization. I know that's a much abused term, but it is a place where you go to learn, and there are different special interest groups within CESI. There are those who are particularly interested in particular types of technology. There are others who are interested in particular areas of the system, whether that's special ed or primary or post primary or whatever. So it is a place that attracts people in if they are looking, and again I use that word at the beginning, a tribe
Mm.
that are interested in things that they are interested in. So it's amazing, actually, that it has continued to evolve and to grow over the years, because it just shows how valued it is in the landscape of Irish education.
When do you think we're going to see? And this is a tough question, and it's not on the script. But one of the
Hmm.
things I meet every single day in my work with schools is the issues with IT in schools. When do you think, or who do we have to talk to say that schools need, and this is sounding like me looking for a job. I'm not. I have a job. Thanks very much. But when are schools going to get their IT person? Like the county council have 15, and
Yeah, yeah. Well,
surely somebody somewhere at government level went, do you know what? We could create employment by.
hmm. Well, yeah, look, it's a key. Okay, I'm going to answer it in a kind of a roundabout way.
Okay.
Uh, it's a very important piece of the jigsaw. I have just spent the last 2 days at a European online event looking at the enabling factors around implementing digital education in a school
Mm,
system, ecosystem. One of the key areas that came up from across the European 27 member states is this issue of tech support. And technical support has been there since the very beginning, since when I started in the department, when I was seconded into the National Centre for Technology and Education in '98. Uh, I have recently done work last and this time last year, November, December, with the department. We did some consultations around the new digital strategy, which was published earlier this year. And number one issue that was coming up was technical support. And uh, so the people in the department are very aware of it, and I know they are very keen to do something on it. But going back to this point that where I started about the whole of government approach, this is something the Department of Education on their own can't solve, and I think they are certainly looking at other, how can they do this in a way that is sustainable. I think that's a key point, how it's sustainable, and that it's equitable and accessible to all. So I do think we need to address it. It certainly is the elephant in the room, because I'm reminded, I'm a big fan of Larry Cuban, who has written a lot of books, but one of my favorite books is called Teachers and Machines. Now, I'm going to paraphrase Larry Cuban for a moment, but he gives a great example in that book around the blackboard and the reason why it's been so successful and why it's been used across the world. One, it's cheap.
Mhm.
Number two, it's flexible. You can use colored chalk. And number three, it never breaks down. So until we reach a stage that there is some form of technical support, because teachers are certainly not technicians, they shouldn't be running around with screwdrivers trying to fix things. Even though if you have one in your school that has that skill set, they're like gold. You're
Yes.
going to really mind them. Now, I do know that the department are thinking about a new position in school. So we used to have a thing called the ICT coordinator, which in the main actually was that technical person. And many of those people were very involved in CESI because they were very technical people. But there is a new role that the department see, and it's more of a pedagogical role of using the technology to support teaching, learning, and assessment practices. But it's not an either or. We do need tech support. We do need models that are sustainable, as I said. Uh, and when we are providing funding to schools for equipment, whatever that is, that there is, in that we are thinking, and this again came up in the last few days, around refresh and maintenance,
Mm.
because that is the way it works. These things break. My own computer actually died on me earlier today when I was on a meeting. Okay, I knew what to do. But if that happens to you in a school, and if it happens to you on a regular basis, you won't be doing this again.
Yeah, exactly. And that's most of my time. My time is split evenly. I'd say between fixing and teaching, or not teaching students, but working with teachers.
Yes.
And that's what I love doing. Yes, turn it off and back on again. Yes, I look after the network if it falls over or do whatever I can. But
Yeah.
my happiest times is when teacher turn around to me and says, I wonder how will we do this? Or I'd love my favorite moment was a teacher who'd never used PowerPoint asked me, I'd like to use PowerPoint in my class. Any suggestions? And I was explaining about moving forward and back. And
Mm.
I said, you know what? I'll sit in the class because the students don't see me anymore. I'm invisible. It's
Yeah.
great. I'll sit in the class and I'll know by your cue what the next slide is. And this is happened recently. And that to me enabled that teacher to use PowerPoint. And the role is there for the IT person. And I think I've spoken about it often enough. I am that IT guy. Like that's,
Yes.
get me to do
Yes.
it. But I think there's a layer to be added to that role, and that's a trainer. So an IT trainer. I think
Yeah.
there could be
Yeah.
something there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And again, as you were talking there, and there's quite a lot of innovative practice in our own systems. Okay, again, as I mentioned, CESI covers primary, post-primary, further education, and higher education, and particularly in the further education and training space where John Heffernan now is working himself at the moment. There has been a lot of movement by certain ETBs around the country to do mentoring programs, right? So I do a lot of work with Donegal ETB, and we have just finished we call it a technology enhanced learning mentoring program. Actually, in Donegal, they call it the Buddy Up program.
Okay.
I call it the Sit by Nelly or the Sit by Hassan.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this is the reality. And again, the department are actually aware of this, and they heard this coming through on the consultations that, there are people in our schools who are absolutely brilliant teachers, but they need somebody. A course isn't going to cut it for them. They need somebody who's going to sit beside them and help them and do as you did in that classroom. And so therefore, when we talk about support ecosystem, it's more, as you said yourself, it's more than IT support. It's that trainer role, mentoring role, etc. And again, I think we need to think about how we can develop that in a sustainable way in our schools, because there is a cost attached to digital, and we have to be just upfront and say it. And the question then is, if we're using this public money and parents' money for digital in our schools, what impact is it having, and is it really helping the student? So I think that's a different question, but it does need to be supported.
I completely agree with you. I do think it's a different question, but I think it's a tail of the original question. So if you enable the teacher, and the teacher is doing something that they never did before, and they enjoy doing it, they enjoy teach. I enjoy teaching maths like this, or I enjoy teaching
Yes.
geography using Google, whatever, and then that's amazing. That's a thing. But I'm frustrated, and I'll move on from the point. I am frustrated because I can see the position. I can see the education centres. I can
Mhm.
see what the ETB are doing. I can see my school, or one of my schools, one of my many schools who aren't necessarily ETB. I can see what they're doing, and damn me if I cannot connect the dots.
Yeah, I know,
It
I know.
frustrates
Look, yeah, look, look, I know, and we'll move on, but
me. Yeah,
it is. I think all I can say on that is right is that I think in Ireland we are trying to grapple with it. We're not ignoring it. In fairness to the department, they are listening, but it's not an easy one.
no, not
Uh,
at all.
yeah, but again, going back to Larry Cuban, if we don't address it, things are not. We There is a danger. Like I remember hearing a really inspiring primary teacher. I won't name the town, but she was in a new school and she had no broadband. And this teacher had some brilliant ideas on how to use digital technology with her students in a really active, engaging way. But she didn't have internet. So,
Mm.
and there were other challenges there, and that's a technical problem as well. So she had to just tear it all up and think about doing it a different way. And I think that shows the resilience of our teachers as well, that they are, they're flexible and they're whatever, that they can actually change in a moment if the thing drops or if it's not working. And oh, okay,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's only sustainable for so long.
It is. And look at I I've said it before and I'll say it again, and I'm not just saying this because majority of our audience are teachers. It always amazes me as somebody coming from industry that I sit down, the time stops for nobody, and the teacher doesn't stop. Like the teacher, deal with it. There's a situation, deal with it, move on. The start of the year, August, September, is the busiest time in a school. It doesn't matter what's broken. I'll stop and I'll go, oh, well, what am I going to do now? You don't think like that. You think there's a problem. I'm either going to deal with it or I'm going to work around it and deal with it again. Time
Yes.
stops for nobody. So back to
Yeah.
the whole CESI. We spoke about the greatest impact of CESI, and I think CESI is always having an impact. Is
Always.
always there. Now offline, and I hope you don't mind me mentioning this. We spoke about the question, the biggest missed opportunities in technology education in Ireland over the past few years. And both myself, I like that question. John put it in there. We spoke about the question itself. You let's ask the question about the question. It's not your what wouldn't be your favorite question.
No, I kind of, yeah, I suppose I was saying to you off air when I looked at the question, I kind of thought, it looked a little negative to me,
Okay.
and that I was looking to find, and when we were chatting, we were kind of talking about, oh, if we gave one to one to every student and all of this,
Mm-mm.
I would actually look at it slightly differently. I mean, I think I am in the main glass half full, but I think we need to be. I think for one moment we need to acknowledge that we're actually doing a lot right in Ireland, despite all the challenges we have. Okay, there are member states, European countries that have a lot bigger challenges in this area than we have, and again, I think CESI has played a very big part in ensuring that we are where we are. However, um, I do think that we are at a very interesting crossroads now, post COVID. Um, And I suppose I think this is where the opportunity is. And I suppose as I look down the road, I'm asking myself, will it be a missed opportunity? So I'm kind of reframing your question.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that? Over the last 12 months, I've had the opportunity to speak to various groups. And the assumption is kind of like this: post COVID, we are going to be moving into a new area. It's going to be a new normal, and everything is going to be digital. And I'm not so sure.
Mm.
Okay. Uh, Again, with a colleague, Deirdre Butler, who was also very involved in CESI with me when around in the era that I was very involved. Um, we've created a little timeline. We call it AC. Sorry, we call it BC before COVID, DC during COVID, and AC after COVID. Okay, so we got AC/DC in there.
I like.
But right, so I mean, what we're saying is there was a lot going on before COVID, but during COVID we had this explosion. We were forced to use digital. To do a thing in the beginning, which was called emergency remote teaching, but it was really the use of online and the use of the internet. Now, for many, it was okay. For some, it was dreadful. And for others, it was magnificent. So I think we need to be careful now. There's an opportunity, and teachers at that time invested a huge amount of energy and time in developing their digital skills. So now, what I would love to see, the opportunity that I see is how can we take that learning and all that time that was put in, and now that they're back in their classrooms in person, how can they continue to use those digital skills to enhance teaching, learning, and assessment? That's where I think the opportunity is. And I hope we don't lose it.
I couldn't agree more. I believe we learn by what doesn't work. Without oversimplifying John's question,
Yeah,
we learn by what doesn't work. One of the things I will ask in schools is what works for you, but more importantly, what doesn't work,
yes,
because let's remove that. My job as a technologist, as an educational technologist, is to remove the obstacles that are in
yeah,
your way to becoming to use technology effectively in the classroom.
yeah. Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I think this is an area, this is an opportunity now. And I think, again, I was talking to another colleague of mine, Harvey Meller, who does a lot of work with me. Harvey used to work in the Institute of Education in London, and he's a lot more experience, a lot more wily than I on this area. But I mean, okay, you said at the very beginning. I mean, like we've had computers in schools, in a select few schools since the 1950s. So let's not forget that, right? So we're 70 years on now. But what we're still missing is answering that question. We need a lot more examples of how people are using digital to solve some of those problems, you know, in good ways. So we need more examples of what are the maths teachers doing? How are they doing it? We need more examples of the history teachers. How are people in primary using it to develop literacy skills or numeracy skills? And you might say, God, we don't have that 70 years on. Well, we don't have enough of it because we have new tools and we have new contexts. So I think it's about grasping the situation, and ultimately what we have now is teachers and students, learners, have more choices. So the teacher who's back in their classroom and they're going, oh, thanks for the goodness, I'm no longer online from my bedroom or whatever.
Mm.
Yes, that's great. You're now back in your classroom and you've learned all these digital skills. Can you use them? Is it appropriate? Where would they fit? And will it help the learning? And I think that is where we're at the moment. And I think the challenge is, how can we address the people who are saying, oh, look, we did that online learning was a disaster? Well, it actually wasn't really online. That was an emergency response. It wasn't fully planned or fully designed. But imagine if you could combine that with what you're doing in the face to face, things like the flipped classroom, which I'm a huge fan of, then, oh, that could work. Oh, I see. And get them to think about that, and getting them to really think about how we can use these tools to enhance or improve what we're trying to do in our classrooms. That's where I think the opportunity is.
We spoke to Kate Malloy on this very podcast, and Kate, we were one of the things that I asked Kate I was asking all guests. I suppose I'll put it your way as well. Is the reflection process. So the during COVID, the post COVID. So now we need to stop, drop, and reflect. So we need to go,
Yes.
what worked, what
Yes.
didn't work, how can we move forward? I think there's an obstacle that's going to be presented. The how do I say this? There's loads of teachers out there who have used technology, who have
Mm,
embraced technology,
yeah.
who felt that the learning was, yeah, okay, I liked it, who don't believe they've used it. They don't even know what they don't realize the impact of what they've done. Like last week or 3 years ago, you didn't know what the PowerPoint is. 3 years
Yeah.
later, you're talking to me about embedding a lesson plan in a website. You go, what?
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Well, well, first of all, I am a huge believer in reflection. I think that teaching is a reflective profession. And if you don't reflect, well, sorry, that's not that's not a good thing. And I think we need to critically reflect. Now, that's not me. What I mean by critically reflect is not to be negative, but to think about, yeah, I tried that. How did it go? I mean, I never teach the same thing the same way. I mean, I could do a presentation last week, and if somebody said, Michael, will you give the same presentation next week? I'll definitely change something, because I think you have to reflect back. And I think that critical reflection um, is vital. And in all of the stuff I do, we engage in. And I agree with you, Hassan. I think some people look at me and go, why are you asking me to look back? I just want to forget about it. Well, yeah, I know it was tough, but think about some of the things that really worked. And I've heard some wonderful stories of things that worked. And I've heard stories of things that people tried that they thought they could never do. And they were able to activate it. And the biggest thing was the learners loved it.
mm.
So I think it's taking those little nuggets and figuring out, how can I take that forward? How can I replicate it again now that the context is different? So I think that's what we really need to do.
And it's accessibility as well.
Yeah.
Accessibility is a big thing for all learners. What I found with what I heard with COVID when it came to online learning, and everybody had access, but there was also those who didn't have access. So we'll deal with that now in a second. But everybody
Mm,
had access, and that got me thinking that the learning space, the classroom, has remained the same for years and years and years. Now we're reinventing the learning space. I think
correct.
that's key.
Well, I'm. This is an area I'm really interested in. Right, there's a guy, an Australian researcher called Peter Goodyear, and there are others in this space. So there's a couple of things there. I agree with you completely. We have traditionally developed all of our activities around this physical space, and we have different technologies in there, books and boards and all sorts of other things, pencils and biros and paper and whatever. But during COVID, we got a glimpse of this other space, which is a virtual space, and it can connect to our physical spaces. Now, I'm a big fan of online learning. I managed an online teacher master's program for Hibernia College for a number of years, and that was the basis of my doctoral research. So I'm a fan. Okay, when it's done well, but when it's done poorly, it's like any teaching. It's not effective. So now I think the question is: we have these new spaces, we have new tools. How can we use the traditional spaces and these new spaces to have an impact on the lives of learners? That's what I think we really need to be thinking about. One of the things we know about digital education, and it's in all the policy documents, is it references active learning. So the role of the learner being active. And I remember being on a online meeting during COVID, and there was a group on from Portugal, and one of the participants spoke to me about his children, two boys, who really loved lockdown, COVID-19, the early stages, because they were able to engage in project-based learning, and their teachers gave them projects to engage in. They were able to connect with learners in other parts of the world, etc., etc. So I do think that there is a wonderful opportunity for more of that active learning. I'll use the word active learning, and I mean, in my own work, we do an awful lot of work around cooperative learning. Again, it's it's in this idea that the teacher is not just this, and it's an old term, the sage on the stage, just
Mhm.
filling, think of grad grind, hard times, filling vessels. You know, that the role of the teacher is much more complex than that. That they are designing, and the word designing comes into this discussion as well. They're designing learning experiences. They are differentiating. You said inclusive. They are using, and they're using the technologies in a way, and they are becoming more of a facilitator or a guide on the side. Now, to do that well is very complex, and it takes a highly competent teacher to do it. And I think giving up a little bit of, and this is one of the things that I'm trying to do with the groups I work with, is to not to feel that they have to do all the work, that the students have to do more of the work. And I'm involved in a very interesting project at the moment, which we're doing with Sligo Education Centre around this thing called self-regulated learning. So that's managing your learning. And for project-based learning, our students need that skill as well. So yes, I'm in total agreement there.
Um, and look at Michael. I could talk to you about this for forever and ever. I think it brings us back to what CESI can do and what CESI stands for, and indeed the CESI list, which seems like such a simple idea, but it's like the power of the list, the power of the Mehel, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that group.
yeah.
It's it's looked over, and it's people go, yeah, but it's more than just a list. It's more than just a community.
Yeah, and I mean, you've highlighted this, and again, I would have been on the list at one point, but I've dropped off it. I'll have to be honest, and I better get back on it. Some of my colleagues that work with me are on the list, and I think it is this space. I'm more of a coffee and a chat person. I have to say it myself. Even on other social media like Twitter, which I've been on for many years, I'm more of a watcher and harvester, I suppose, than getting into a conversation. But that's just me. But I do think discussion. At the end of the day, all of these tools that are helping us to have meaningful discussions where we can engage in a respectful way with other colleagues and others and learn, I think is hugely valuable. And that to me is what organizations like the Computer Education Society of Ireland have always been. They have been welcoming spaces where people can go, they can ask those questions that maybe they were afraid to ask others. They were able to congregate around the issues that they were having themselves, which maybe other people in schools didn't want to hear about. Um, so, it has always been that space. And, one other thing there about, things that CESI has contributed to, one area that I think it has definitely contributed to, and I didn't mention, is the whole development of the computer science curriculum at Leaving Cert. Because that's been on the agenda from, that's kind of connected with the name, Computer Education Society of Ireland. So, and Elizabeth, going back to the founding members, it was very much in that informatics, computer science area. And I think that's a huge plus for the system. The only challenge we have there is how do we get more students to take that subject? How do we make it more available to more students around the country that may not have somebody qualified to teach computer science in their classroom? But again, that's another day's work.
And look, I'm involved with Maker Meet. What we do is I want to introduce maker spaces. I believe classrooms have
Yeah.
been maker spaces ever since the first Christmas card was made for a parent going home. It's been a maker space. I love that
Yes.
idea
Yes.
of maker ed, maker education. Michael, I could talk to you for the next 47 hours. Tell us about some of the projects you have coming up, or is there anything in particular you want to talk to us about?
Yeah, look, no, look, we've had a wonderful conversation, and I know people are probably going, "Oh, are they going to ever stop?" But yeah, no, look, I'm involved in a couple of interesting things. As I said, I'm doing a lot of work at the European level at the moment. I'm very privileged to be working around a lot of issues around the Digital Education Action Plan. I suppose the takeaway I take from that is that we in Ireland are doing a lot in that space. We've very interesting project with the department and with the PDST with Anthony Kilcoyne around artificial intelligence for teachers. And so that's we're going to be piloting with a group of post primary teachers a MOOC on AI for teachers in the coming months, and my good friend Professor Deirdre Butler up in DCU is going to be evaluating that in the spring. Yeah, I mentioned the self-regulated learning project. I think that's really good. But ultimately, I'm still doing the same thing I did at the beginning. It's trying to figure out how do we use digital technology to really support teaching, learning, and assessment, to make it more enjoyable for teachers, to make it more engaging for their learners, and that's really what I'm all about. And thankfully, I'm still learning every day.
Always stay learning. Always stay learning. Michael, how can people get a hold of you? If they
Yeah,
haven't?
look, yeah, the easiest way to get me is if you just do a Google search for Michael Hallissy, and if you want to email me, it's mhallissy, HALLISSY, at h2.ie. I'm on Twitter as well, so you can follow me there. I do retweet every so often. Um, but yeah, I'd be happy to chat to anyone. And Hassan, it's been a real pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to the physical meeting in the not too distant future. So thank you for having me.
Look, thanks for joining us, and Michael, stay learning.
I certainly will. No choice.